It was a quiet night at Westfield University's main library, the kind of stillness that only exists after midnight when most students have retreated to their dorms or apartments. The grand old building, with its imposing stone facade and Gothic architecture, took on an almost mystical quality in the late hours. Moonlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floors and illuminating dust particles that danced in the air like tiny constellations. The library had stood for over a century, witnessing generations of students frantically preparing for exams, researching obscure topics, or simply finding solace among the thousands of books that lined its shelves. Alex Matthews sat hunched over a stack of research papers, his dark-rimmed glasses sliding down his nose as he scribbled notes in his journal. At 26, he was in his final year of graduate studies in architectural history, a field that combined his love for design with his passion for preserving the stories of the past. His thesis deadline loomed just 2 weeks away, and he'd been practically living in the library for the past month. Tonight was no different. He'd claimed his usual spot in the northwest corner of the third floor, surrounded by architectural journals and his laptop displaying complex diagrams of 18th-century building techniques. The library was nearly empty at this hour, with only a handful of other night owls scattered throughout the vast building. Alex preferred it this way. The quiet allowed him to focus, to lose himself in his research without the distractions of daytime crowds. He was wearing his standard uniform, a soft navy blue sweater over a button-down shirt, khaki pants, and comfortable loafers. His brown hair, usually neatly styled, had become increasingly disheveled as the night wore on, a physical manifestation of his mental state as he dove deeper into his work. Across the room, Jamie Chun had been stealing glances at Alex for the past hour. Unlike Alex, Jamie wasn't a regular midnight library visitor. As a junior studying environmental science, he typically preferred studying in groups, feeding off the energy of others. But his roommate was hosting a small party in their shared apartment, making concentration impossible. So here he was, trying to make sense of climate modeling data while occasionally watching the serious graduate student who seemed so intensely focused on his work. Jamie was everything Alex wasn't: outgoing, spontaneous, and comfortable in his own skin. His bright yellow t-shirt stood out against the muted tones of the library, much like his personality stood out in any room he entered. At 21, he approached life with an infectious enthusiasm that drew people to him. His black hair was artfully tousled, and a small rainbow pin adorned his backpack, a subtle but deliberate statement about his identity that he wore with pride. The library had been pleasantly cool all evening, the air conditioning humming softly in the background, a sound so constant that most students didn't even notice it anymore. That's why when it suddenly stopped, the silence felt almost deafening. At first, no one reacted, but within 15 minutes, the atmosphere began to change. The air grew heavier, stiller. Alex looked up from his notes, frowning slightly as he felt the first beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Did the air conditioning just die? He muttered to himself, glancing around the room. The old building was known for its poor temperature regulation, freezing in winter and stifling in summer. But tonight was particularly warm for late spring, and without the AC, the enclosed space would quickly become uncomfortable. Jamie, who had been considering packing up and heading back to face the party at his apartment, saw this unexpected development as an opportunity. He gathered his books and, with a confidence that Alex could only dream of possessing, walked directly to Alex's table. "Mind if I join you?" Jamie asked, his voice breaking the sacred library silence. "I think we might be in for a sweaty night of studying." He gestured toward the ceiling vents, which had fallen silent. Alex looked up, slightly startled by the interruption. He wasn't used to socializing in his sanctuary, especially with someone as vibrant as the young man standing before him. But there was something disarming about Jamie's smile, a genuine warmth that made Alex nod despite himself. "Sure," he said, moving some of his papers to make room. "Though I'm not sure how much longer I'll stay if it keeps getting hotter." Jamie slid into the chair across from Alex, arranging his books with casual efficiency. "I'm Jamie, by the way. Environmental science. I've seen you here before. You're always in this same spot." "Alex, architectural history," Alex replied, surprised that anyone had noticed his routine. "And yes, I like the consistency. Helps me focus." As they settled into an awkward silence, the temperature continued to rise. The library, with its poor ventilation and massive windows that trapped heat like a greenhouse, was quickly becoming uncomfortable. Alex tugged at his sweater collar, feeling increasingly distracted by the warmth. "You know," Jamie said after watching Alex fidget for several minutes, "there's an easy solution to this problem." His eyes twinkled with mischief as he leaned forward slightly. Alex raised an eyebrow, waiting for Jamie to continue. "We could just study Shirtless," Jamie suggested, his tone playful, but with an undercurrent of seriousness. "I mean, there's hardly anyone here, and it's got to be approaching 80 degrees already." Alex nearly choked on the water he'd just sipped. "Excuse me?" he sputtered, his cheeks flushing with color that had nothing to do with the heat. Jamie laughed, a sound that seemed to bounce off the library walls and settle somewhere in Alex's chest. "I'm just saying, it's a practical solution. We're both guys, it's midnight, and we're in the most secluded corner of the library. Plus, I'm pretty sure Mrs. Winters at the front desk fell asleep an hour ago." Alex glanced toward the main desk, where the elderly librarian was indeed nodding off over her crossword puzzle. He then looked back at Jamie, trying to determine if he was joking or serious. The idea was absurd, unprofessional, and completely contrary to Alex's nature. And yet, as another drop of sweat rolled down his back, he couldn't help but see the logic in it. "That's not something people do in libraries," Alex said finally, his voice lower than before, conscious of the few other students scattered throughout the floor. Jamie shrugged, pulling his textbook closer. "Maybe they should. Anyway, it was just a suggestion. No pressure." He returned to his reading, seemingly unbothered by both the heat and Alex's rejection of his idea. For the next 20 minutes, Alex tried to focus on his research, but his mind kept wandering. The heat was becoming increasingly distracting, his sweater now feeling like a woolen straitjacket. He watched as Jamie, seemingly unconcerned with conventional library etiquette, casually rolled up the sleeves of his t-shirt, revealing toned arms decorated with a small tattoo of a mountain range on his right bicep. "What's your thesis about?" Jamie asked suddenly, breaking the silence that had settled between them. Alex welcomed the distraction from his increasingly uncomfortable state. "I'm examining how architectural preservation intersects with community identity in post-industrial cities," he explained, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Specifically looking at how repurposed historical buildings can serve as anchors for neighborhood revitalization without contributing to gentrification." Jamie nodded, genuinely interested. "That's fascinating. So like, turning old factories into community spaces instead of luxury condos." "Exactly," Alex said, surprised and pleased by Jamie's quick understanding. "Most of my research focuses on successful case studies where the original architectural integrity was maintained while adapting the spaces for modern community needs." As they continued talking, the temperature seemed to rise even further. Alex finally relented and removed his sweater, draping it over the back of his chair. The button-down shirt underneath was already showing dark patches of sweat. "This is ridiculous," Alex muttered, fanning himself with a journal. "I can't believe the maintenance staff hasn't responded yet." Jamie glanced at his phone. "It's almost 1 in the morning. I doubt anyone's coming until tomorrow." He looked at Alex with that same mischievous smile. "My offer still stands, you know." Alex found himself laughing despite his discomfort. There was something about Jamie's carefree attitude that was starting to break through his usually rigid demeanor. "You're persistent, I'll give you that. Life's too short to be uncomfortable when there's a simple solution," Jamie replied with a shrug. Then, without further discussion, he reached down and pulled his yellow t-shirt over his head in one fluid motion. Alex froze, his eyes widening as Jamie casually folded his shirt and placed it on the table. Jamie's torso was lean and tanned, with a light trail of hair running down his stomach and disappearing into the waistband of his jeans. The mountain range tattoo was part of a larger piece that extended across his shoulder, depicting a nature scene with remarkable detail. "See? Much better," Jamie said, seemingly oblivious to Alex's stunned expression. He returned to his textbook as if nothing had changed, but there was a slight curl to his lips that suggested he was fully aware of the effect he was having. Alex tried to look anywhere but at Jamie, suddenly finding the architectural diagrams on his laptop intensely interesting. But the heat was becoming unbearable, his shirt now sticking uncomfortably to his back. He glanced around the library floor once more. The few other students were far away, most with headphones on and completely absorbed in their own work. "I can't believe I'm considering this," Alex muttered, more to himself than to Jamie. Jamie looked up, his expression softening. "Hey, no pressure. I'm just doing what's comfortable for me. You do whatever works for you." There was something in Jamie's tone, a genuine respect for Alex's boundaries, that made Alex's decision easier. With a deep breath and a silent prayer that no one from his department would suddenly appear, Alex began unbuttoning his shirt. His fingers trembled slightly, and used to such a public display, even in the near-empty library. "I've never done anything like this before," Alex admitted as he slipped his shirt off, immediately feeling the relative coolness of the air on his skin. Unlike Jamie's confident display, Alex hunched slightly, self-conscious about his paler, less defined physique. "First time for everything," Jamie replied, his eyes briefly taking in Alex's exposed torso before respectfully returning to his face. "And for what it's worth, you have nothing to be self-conscious about." Alex felt his cheeks warm again, but this time it wasn't entirely unpleasant. There was something strangely liberating about sitting there, the ancient library books surrounding them as they defied convention in this small, harmless way. "So," Jamie said, leaning forward slightly, "tell me more about these post-industrial buildings you're studying." And just like that, they fell into a rhythm of conversation and study. Alex found himself relaxing as they discussed architecture, environmental science, and eventually their personal lives. Jamie was a junior transfer student from California, which explained his comfort with casual nudity and his perpetual tan. He was passionate about climate change mitigation and hoped to work in sustainable urban planning after graduation, a field that overlapped interestingly with Alex's architectural preservation focus. As the night progressed, they moved from the table to the stacks, searching for reference materials that could help with both their projects. The library took on a different quality as they wandered between the towering bookshelves, their bare torsos illuminated by the soft glow of the emergency lights. There was an intimacy to it, two people sharing knowledge and space in this unconventional way. "Check this out," Jamie whispered, pulling a large volume from a high shelf. His muscles flexed with the effort, and Alex found himself admiring the movement before quickly averting his eyes. "It's a study on urban heat islands and building materials. Might be useful for both of us." They stood close together in the narrow aisle, shoulders nearly touching as they flipped through the book. Alex was acutely aware of the proximity, of the faint scent of Jamie's cologne mingling with the familiar smell of old books. It was disorienting in the most pleasant way, like discovering a new room in a house you thought you knew completely. "This is actually perfect," Alex said, pointing to a chapter on retrofitting historical buildings with sustainable cooling systems. "I've been looking for case studies that preserve architectural elements while improving energy efficiency." Jamie smiled, a genuine expression that created small crinkles around his eyes. "See? Good things happen when you step outside your comfort zone." The double meaning wasn't lost on Alex. He found himself returning the smile, their eyes meeting for a moment longer than necessary. There was a charge in the air that had nothing to do with the broken air conditioning. "I suppose they do," Alex agreed softly. They returned to their table with several books, sitting closer than they had before. As they worked, the initial awkwardness of their shirtless state had completely disappeared. Instead, there was a new awareness between them, a current of possibility that hadn't existed hours earlier. The quiet of the library was suddenly broken by the sound of a book falling somewhere nearby. Both men froze, exchanging alarmed glances. "I thought we were alone up here," Alex whispered, instinctively crossing his arms over his chest. Jamie tilted his head, listening. "Maybe it just fell off a shelf?" Those old books aren't always shelved properly. Before Alex could respond, they heard footsteps approaching their corner. Panic flashed across his face as he looked frantically for his shirt, which had somehow ended up under a pile of research papers. "What do we do?" he hissed, mortified at the thought of being discovered half-naked in the university library. Jamie, in contrast, seemed completely unfazed. "We're not doing anything wrong," he said calmly. "It's hot. We're studying. Simple as that." The footsteps grew closer, and Alex held his breath as a figure appeared at the end of their row. It was a young woman with purple hair, another late-night studier who looked as surprised to see them as they were to see her. "Oh, she said, taking in their shirtless state with raised eyebrows. Sorry to interrupt. The AC's out on the second floor too, so I came up here hoping it would be better. No such luck, Jamie replied cheerfully. Hence our current state of undress. The woman nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. Innovative solution. Mind if I grab that reference guide on the shelf behind you? Then I'll leave you guys to your studying. Alex, who had been frozen in mortification, finally found his voice. Of course, go ahead. She quickly retrieved the book she needed, gave them a knowing look, and disappeared back into the stacks. As her footsteps faded, Alex let out a long breath. Oh my God, he groaned, burying his face in his hands. She definitely thought we were, you know? Jamie laughed, the sound echoing in the quiet space. Would that be so terrible? He asked, his tone light, but his eyes searching Alex's face. The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Alex looked at Jamie, really looked at him, and felt something shift inside his chest. In the span of a few hours, this stranger had somehow broken through years of careful restraint, of always doing what was expected, of never taking risks. No, Alex said finally, surprising himself with his honesty. No, it wouldn't be terrible at all. Jamie's smile softened, and he reached across the table, his fingers lightly brushing against Alex's hand. Good to know. The touch sent a current through Alex's body, both thrilling and terrifying in its newness. They stayed like that for a moment, connected by this small point of contact, before Jamie gently withdrew his hand and returned to his textbook. We should probably finish what we came here to do, he said, though his eyes conveyed a different message entirely. Plenty of time for other studies later. Alex nodded, trying to focus on the architectural diagrams that now seemed far less interesting than the person sitting across from him. They worked in a comfortable silence for another hour, occasionally exchanging glances that grew increasingly heated as the night progressed. By 3 a.m, the library had emptied completely except for them and Mrs. Winters, who was still dozing at the front desk. The heat had become almost bearable as their bodies adjusted to the temperature, but neither made any move to put their shirts back on. I should probably head home soon, Alex said reluctantly, gathering his notes. I have a meeting with my advisor at 10. Jamie nodded, beginning to pack up his own materials. This was not what I expected when I came to the library tonight, he said, a smile playing at his lips. Me neither, Alex admitted. But I'm glad the AC broke. They dressed slowly, almost regretfully, each button of Alex's shirt feeling like it was closing more than just fabric. As they walked together toward the library exit, their shoulders occasionally brushing, Alex felt a courage he rarely experienced. Would you maybe want to get coffee sometime? He asked, the words tumbling out before he could overthink them. To discuss the intersection of architectural preservation and environmental sustainability, of course. Jamie's face lit up with a smile that made Alex's heart skip. I'd like that. Though I can't promise I won't suggest inappropriate solutions to everyday problems. I'm counting on it, Alex replied, surprised by his own boldness. They exchanged numbers as they stood on the library steps. The night air a blessed relief after hours in the stifling building. Campus was deserted, the moonlight casting long shadows across the quad. Good night, Alex, Jamie said, his voice soft in the darkness. Thanks for being adventurous tonight. Before Alex could respond, Jamie leaned forward and pressed a quick, gentle kiss to his cheek, then turned and walked toward the south dormitories. Alex stood frozen, his hand rising to touch the spot where Jamie's lips had been, a smile spreading across his face. As he finally turned to walk to his own apartment, Alex couldn't help but think about how different the night had turned out from what he'd planned. He'd gone to the library to study architectural history, but instead had learned something far more valuable. Sometimes the most unexpected circumstances lead to the most meaningful connections. The broken air conditioning had created an opportunity for walls to come down, for vulnerability to be shared, for two people to see each other in a way they might never have otherwise. And as Alex walked home under the stars, his thesis temporarily forgotten, he found himself looking forward to his next study session with Jamie, whether it involved shirts or not. The library would always be there, with its ancient knowledge and quiet corners. But now it held something else for Alex, the memory of the night he'd finally stepped outside his comfort zone and discovered something wonderful waiting for him there. And as he reached his apartment, He couldn't help but hope that the maintenance staff would take their time fixing that air conditioning system. After all, he and Jamie might need to do some more research in those secluded stacks very soon. Total_char_count, 18,842.